What's going on, you guys? My name is Jay Fritz and welcome to yet another video. Today I'm going to give you guys the specifications on the Canon RF 15-35 f2.8 lens. I'm going to try to keep today's video pretty quick and to the point with the specifications, but if you guys are interested in a much more in-depth, hands-on review that talks about the real-world use of this lens, the next video I'll be releasing is going to be that hands-on review. To start off, this lens comes in at $2,400 US. Now, although $2,400 is a lot of money for anybody, it's important to keep in mind that if you do photography or videography for a living, or if you're just making some sort of income on that business, it could be a very worthy investment to make. One thing I love about the build quality of these lenses is that not only do they feel very sturdy, but they also have a really smooth pull when you're using either your focus ring or your zoom ring. There are a couple of switches on the side of this lens. One is for your autofocus and manual focus, but the other is for turning on and off your in-lens stabilization. Another great feature to the mirrorless L series lineup of lenses is that you have this control ring that allows you to assign any setting to your control ring so that you can switch really easily and smoothly, whether it's set to something like your color temperature, another exposure setting, or like me, you can change it to your focus setting so that you can switch between face tracking and subject or area tracking in just the scroll of the wheel. The 15-35mm also has Canon's dust and weather sealing, which just adds that extra layer of protection to the camera, especially if, like me, you're using this lens out in rugged conditions. The size of this lens is not the most compact. It comes in at 4.99 inches from bottom to top without this lens hood, and the body of the lens is 3.48 inches wide. There is also a little bit of heft to the lens as it comes in at 1.85 pounds, I believe making it a little bit heavier than the Canon R5 body itself. So if, like me, you're using the R5, your front end is going to be a lot heavier than the back end on the camera. This isn't really an issue, but I'd say over time, especially if you're shooting for a long day and you're not used to it, it could cause a little bit of strain on your wrist from having that heavy front end of the camera. So I would recommend, if you are using this setup, maybe have a camera strap or some other secondary method of carrying around your camera setup so that that weight is not always powering down on your wrist. And if you're someone that likes to use polarizers or ND filters or creative filters, the end of this lens has a 82mm filter thread. In the box, you'll also receive this lens hood that comes with the 15-35mm. It rotates on really easily, and there's a button press that you hit when you want to take it off. Comes off just like that. It's super easy, and it's definitely something that I utilize as much as possible. Where this lens hood really comes in handy is if you find yourself in weather like rain or snow. It's just gonna prevent a little bit of that weather from hitting the lens. And of course, you can't have a super wide lens hood without that getting in the way of your image because it is such a wide angle lens. So that's why it's pretty compact, but it stays out of the way, and it does just protect that lens element a little bit more if it bumps around on a wall or on something as you're walking around. All right, so let's cover some of our general specs. This lens has a maximum aperture of f2.8, which gives you a super sharp image and also allows you some flexibility in low light conditions. Now, I recently was actually able to test that out with a shot at night where we had a couple of tents set up and two of my buddies from work were standing around the fire. So I was like, hey, just stand there still. I want to grab this photo. And I was able to capture the night sky. Sadly, it was pretty cloudy, so you can't see many stars, but it still turned out to be a pretty cool image, which is definitely a benefit of this lens. I would say it's a pretty popular option for astrophotography. The lens has a minimum focal distance of 0.92 feet, so under a foot, which is pretty good. I mean, that's like, this far from the lens, and that allows you to get some really cool macro shots as well. The RF 15-35 f2.8 is intended for full frame cameras, so you're not gonna run into any issues mounting this to either a full frame camera or a crop sensor Super 35 camera like the Canon C70. The next thing I want to cover is the stabilization. Wide-angle lenses are already typically pretty stable, especially if you have in-body stabilization within the camera. But with the extra 5 stops of stabilization that you get in this lens, your image is going to be extremely stable for both photo and video modes. You do have the ability, like I mentioned, to turn the stabilization on or off depending on what you're shooting. However, there is one downside to all the stabilization going on when you're using a full frame camera like the Canon R5, And I think it has something to do with having the stabilization active both in the camera and in the lens, and just being such a wide angle lens that when you're shooting any sort of video, you'll get a lot of this warping around the corners of the frame with any fast motion. Finally, let's talk about the image quality. I have nothing but good things to say about this lens. It is extremely sharp, especially with that 2.8 aperture, and the colors are just flawless. It's your typical Canon colors. I have not noticed any significant chromatic aberration or any really bad vignetting around the corners of the frames, which is really nice because I love shooting wide open at 15 millimeters on this lens at f2.8. It's just an incredible image, and there really are no downsides to it in my experience. All right, well, that pretty much wraps up our specification overview of the Canon RF 15-35 f2.8 lens. If you got any value out of this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I also post a lot of hands-on reviews where I take the equipment out into the field, test them on real-world productions, and share the results with you as well. Every time one of you guys subscribes, it just helps to build this community of hungry photographers and videographers that are all hoping to learn from each other. I have a goal of hitting 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year. It is definitely a big goal, but I know that it is achievable with your help and support. And with that said, we can close out the video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.